The Prosecutors Podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations.
In 1973, the New York City Police Department created a hostage negotiation team.
He's not up against the gun. He's up against the man's mind.
When you're defusing a human bomb, it's the same as when you're taking apart a real bomb. If you skip a step, it's going to blow up right in your face.
Talk to Me tells the high-stakes true story of the world's first hostage negotiation team. It changed policing forever. Talk to Me.
From the creators of Dr. Death, Scamfluencers, and Over My Dead Body, Wondery goes deeper into complex true crime stories to give you an inside look at the facts. And now, Wondery is launching the ultimate true crime fan destination, Exhibit C. It's truly criminal. Dive deep into the most devious scams, manipulative cults, and the coldest of cases. Wondery's Exhibit C lets you view all the evidence through a detective's lens, taking you step by step through the twists and turns of each true crime case. Join the Exhibit C online community to access exclusive show merchandise, member-only content, and to hear directly from top criminal and social justice experts, witnesses, and investigators as they take us beyond the evidence and into the case file. Guys, we really think you're going to love this podcast, especially because you're listeners of our cases. We've heard from you guys that you love learning about the system and hearing from people who have boots on the ground of these investigations and these cases. You'll get this from Exhibit C and more. So join now by following Wondery Exhibit C on Facebook or find us on the web at WonderyExhibitC.com and listen to true crime podcasts on Wondery and Amazon Music. Exhibit C. It's truly criminal.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we continue our look at the Kyron Horman case. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my exploring co-host, Alice.
Hi, Brett. I'm so glad to take a break from packing to talk to you tonight because I am exploring. This is going to be crazy. This might be the last episode we ever record because I may never make it back. But I am taking our whole family, including very rambunctious little boys, to Alaska. So I don't know if we'll make it back or there.
Never been to Alaska. Seems like a pretty awesome place.
I'm really, really excited. I've never been in the winter. I think it's technically still fall, but it's below 30 degrees. So it's pretty darn cold. I've only gone in the summer one time and it was incredible. So we're visiting good friends of ours who are also listeners of this show, some of our biggest fans actually. And she was telling her friends in Alaska that we're coming to visit them. And her friend said, they're coming in the winter. They must really love you.
Yeah, I think I would want to go to Alaska in the winter. I like winter. I'm a big fan of the cold, the snow,
it's
the darkness.
17 hours of darkness, which is going to be different.
Right.
I'm hoping that will encourage my kids to sleep past 3 a.m., but who knows?
Yeah, who needs daylight anyway? Daylight's for, whatever. Well, I think it's going to be amazing. If you're in Alaska, well, by the time you hear this, Alice will be back. So sorry you missed her, but maybe Alice will run into some of you guys and y'all can talk about the show together. I am not going anywhere. I'm just hanging out here like a big loser. But maybe one day. I always want to go to Alaska. Go to the
You are
great
not a
Northeast,
loser.
that whole area.
You might have to save me though. Like I'm one of those kind of paranoid travelers when I go like abroad, I would send copies of my like visa and my passport to like all my friends and family. And I'm pretty sure they all just delete it. I'm like, no, if I'm like lost somewhere, please go to the embassy and find me. And this is gonna be a little bit harder because it's not a different country, but I may be like in the Alaskan bush, you know?
Well, you know, a lot of people go missing in Alaska. There's the
No.
Alaskan Triangle. Which
Don't
is
say
a lot
that.
like the Bermuda Triangle. And there's a lot of aliens. Look out for aliens, Alice.
I
UFOs,
will.
abductions.
I will do that.
Don't go to Nome. Nome's a hotbed of UFO activity. People of Nome get upset when you talk about it, so, you know, keep it on the down low.
That's good to
But
know.
Anyway.
That's good to know. Well, anyways, with all that said, I needed a break from packing because, you know, let's be honest, my kids are not packing themselves. So I'm packing them. And it's not like we have winter clothes at all because where we live, Brett, it's like, you know, a nice, balmy 55 to 60 degrees in winter. So I had to buy a lot of winter clothes, and winter clothes take up a lot of room. So I'm excited to take a break and continue talking about this completely mind-boggling case of Kyron.
Yeah, it is mind-boggling. Last time we went over the timeline, and this time we're going to dive into some of the details. We're going to keep coming back to this timeline, though, because it is important, particularly if you think that Kyron's stepmother, Terry, had anything to do about it. Now, look, we're going to talk about Terry a lot, and this is just one of those things I want to say. I've already kind of said it, but I want to say it again. Because there's so little information here and there's been so much focus on Terry, a lot of the discussion is about Terry. If this is a stranger abduction, if it's some other things that we're going to talk about, there's just not a whole lot of evidence about it. So I don't want you to take from the fact that we are talking about Terry so much that means she is involved. Obviously, she's never been charged with anything. She's never been formally accused of anything. And I think it's always important to remember this case really kind of spiraled out of control at one time, and we don't want to do that. But we do want to talk about some of the weird things that happened here, and we'll let you draw your own conclusions. And I think one of the first things that is interesting is, why didn't anyone notice that Kyron was missing? Obviously, he showed up at school, so they saw him. It wasn't as if they thought he was sick. But after that, he just kind of disappears, and nobody even knows. Now, the school actually had a policy, not unlike most schools, of contacting parents when a child was absent, just to ensure that exactly a situation like this didn't happen. That if the child was absent but the parents didn't know about it, that's obviously a red flag. You want to get the police involved as early as possible. But there is a reason they didn't do that here. Terry had told one of the teachers that Kyron had a doctor's appointment that day. So when he wasn't there, no one thought it was unusual. They just assumed he had gone to his doctor's appointment. In fact, there was a doctor's appointment, but it was for the next Friday, not that one. Now, sometimes people will say that this was the last day of school, and they sort of use that as an example of, well, Terry must be lying, because why would she tell the teachers about a doctor's appointment the next week when school was going to be out? That is not true. In fact, this was not the last day of school. It was close to the end of the school year, but there was still a week of school left. So it is not entirely impossible that Terry is telling the truth and that this was a simple miscommunication. And she told the teacher, heads up, next week, Kyron's not going to be here because he has a doctor's appointment. And the teacher hears, Kyron's not going to be here today because he has a doctor's appointment. Now, that is quite the coincidence that it just so happened to coincide with the day that Kyron vanished. But as we've said before, coincidences, they do happen, as unusual as it would be for something like this to coincide together so perfectly.
Yeah, Brett. I mean, it's just one of those things, you know, probably was not a big deal if Kyron hadn't vanished. There could be miscommunication, but it is hard to overlook when you have so few facts that the miscommunication, if there was one, happened to perfectly coincide so that no one would have noticed that Kyron was missing.
And look, there's going to be a lot of coincidences throughout our discussion of this. And it's the coincidences that lead people to think that Terry must have some involvement. Now, obviously, there's this whole thing, serendipity. I'm sure you've all heard about serendipity. And it's just this notion of the unusual coincidences that happen and seem to be inexplicable. Or it can be things like you learn a new word that you've never heard before, and then all of a sudden you hear the word all the time, and you're like, that's weird. Well, there's sort of an explanation for this, and scientists basically say that things are happening all the time around you like that, but you only notice them if you notice them. And when you notice them, it seems really significant. And so, like Alice said, every day, there are thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of miscommunications like this that happen all over the country in all kinds of people's lives. And they don't mean anything, right? They never mean anything unless you happen to be the one who is about to start a nightmare like this. You know, limbs fall off trees all the time. And as long as you don't happen to be jogging underneath it, that's great. But occasionally people get struck by limbs falling from a tree. And it's like, wow, how unlucky is that you just happen to be right there at the moment the limb fell off the tree. But in reality, enough limbs falling off enough trees, eventually they're going to hit somebody. And you might think that's particularly significant if you're the one who gets hit, but maybe it's not. And that's kind of this. She has this communication with a teacher. It's a miscommunication. It gets everybody thinking one thing, and it sets the stage for sort of a perfect storm where now they're not going to notice and we're going to lose time. Having said all that, I still think it's really weird. I think it is a pretty strange coincidence that this miscommunication just happens on this day. And when you start looking at all the other coincidences, all the other weird things that are happening, I think each weird thing that happens this day that seem unusual makes everything else seem even more unusual.
And then, of course, pair it together, not just this coincidence, but with the kind of things that we know to be out of character for her. Going to the gym but not working out, posting on Facebook a picture, and emailing Kyron's mom. You know, these are all things that are out of the ordinary. So paired together with these coincidences, you can see why suspicion has fallen on Terry.
And it wasn't just that Terry told this teacher this. It's been reported by one of Terry's friends that she actually asked one of these friends, who was also the mother of one of Kyron's classmates, to tell the police that the mother had known before Kyron went missing that Kyron did have an appointment the following week to test whether Kyron had epilepsy. And the whole idea was, if she's told multiple people this and she's told them that it was the next week, that it bolsters her story that that's what she told the teacher. So she's asking this friend to say that she knew that. The only problem was she had no idea. Terry hadn't told her that at all. But she essentially wanted her to lie to the police for her so that the police would believe what she was telling them about what she told the teacher. You can read that one in two ways. Obviously, it makes you look guilty when you do something like that. However, people are stupid, and they do really stupid things when suspicion falls on them. And sometimes these stupid things that they do when suspicion falls on them makes them look even more suspicious. So you can imagine a situation in which Terry is feeling this pressure. People are looking at her. Desiree is starting to question her actions. Everybody's questioning what she did that day, and they're beginning to act as though she is a suspect. And maybe she's thinking, man, I didn't do anything. I need some help. And she goes to a friend, and it sort of blows up in her face. I mean, that is one possible explanation. Having said that, once again, doing my best to play devil's advocate here, pretty bad when you're asking somebody to lie for you when the thing that they're lying about is pretty important in the whole case. The whole doctor's appointment thing is kind of weird. This just goes to Terry and Kyron's relationship, which wasn't great. Terry had decided, for reasons that are kind of unclear, that Kyron had epilepsy. It was something that she would tell Desiree. It was something that she told her husband. But nobody else had ever seen any symptoms of this and had any reason to believe it. So it's a little unusual and a little unclear why Terry thought this, but she was constantly talking about taking him to the doctor for this. And apparently she had actually made an appointment for the following week to do just that. In any event, this friend that Terry talked to told her she wasn't going to lie to her and she wasn't going to say something that wasn't true. And Terry was later heard to say in the presence of one of the officers tasked with keeping watch over the family at home that it was such a shame that the teacher had misunderstood her, as it had kept people from realizing Kyron was missing. And this was something she did a lot. There were police in the home pretty much all the time, and Terry would just sort of randomly say things that were pretty helpful to her, knowing the police would overhear it. And presumably hoping that that would sort of bolster their belief in her, that she's not, it's not as if she's going to them directly and saying this, because that would be self-serving. These are just spontaneous comments that just so happen to help her. And that was something she would do fairly often.
And it is kind of a strange, term of art to say, what a shame. Because I tend to think, you hear, and this is, again, from experiences of talking to a lot of victims, a lot of witnesses, the term what a shame is almost like, oh gosh darn, as opposed to like when we see people who are incredibly distressed that something has happened that they've witnessed or that the victim is related to them. It's not just an oh gosh darn, what a shame. It is like a what could I have done? How could this be? Like, how is this possible? Like, it's almost like they can't get full sentences out, even when they are saying self-serving things in our presence or outside of our presence. But it's almost like a gasping for trying to make it understanding, as opposed to a, well, gosh darn it, nobody knew that he was gone. So it's just an interesting way of phrasing things, something that you pick up when you talk to a lot of different witnesses.
And it's just so funny because I'm eternally going back and forth on the whole behavior thing, the sort of behavior thing and how significant it is, because in our jobs, we're always observing people's behavior, and it does affect how you view them as both a witness or a potential target, or whether they're lying, whether they're telling the truth, whether the information they're giving you is solid, whether they're telling you everything. We always try and stay away from it because even if it's useful, it's dangerous. It's just so easy to let behavior confirm your bias. Whatever your bias is, it's so easy for behavior to confirm that for you. For you to find in the person that you're already suspecting they're doing the wrong thing, or they're saying the wrong thing, or they're looking the wrong way, and that means I'm right. They are guilty, right? And so we always try and stay more in the concrete evidence area. But just so you know, plenty of people have said that, as Alice was just saying, Terry's reaction to Kyron's disappearance was very low key. That she was kind of just like, oh, he'll turn up, no big deal. She was surprised, for instance, we mentioned this earlier, that Desiree would drive all the way there that night, as if that wouldn't be the first thing you would do when you heard that your son was missing. And so the sort of gosh darn, what a shame is kind of indicative of how Terry acted.
Yeah, absolutely. And along kind of hand in hand with the school not contacting anyone about his absence is also the fact that an Amber Alert was never issued for Kyron. And now this is because just the Amber Alert is, you may get it on your phone or hear it over the radio. It's usually triggered by law enforcement when a child is missing, but that alone does not trigger the alert that a child's missing. What the system requires is some sort of lookout. So you are supposed to be on the lookout for a vehicle description or a license plate number, and that's what the Amber Alert is. So if you can think back to that loud sound on your phone and the little yellow exclamation point that shows up on your phone that says Amber Alert, red Dodge with some license number believed to be carrying a 3-year-old female from Atlanta, Georgia, something like that. So if you think back to all the Amber Alerts, it's always telling you to look out for some vehicle or some sort of thing that is associated with the missing child, but it's not enough just to say missing child. So you'll never see an Amber Alert that just says, alert, Kyron Horman is missing from his school, because that no one can really help you with that. You can imagine from a law enforcement point, like, I don't know what he looks like. Like, what am I supposed to be looking out for? Is he gone with a non-custodial parent? What's going on? And so the Amber Alert is really just for having eyesight on vehicles that travel across state lines. Now, some have argued that the Amber Alert system should be updated to address this seeming weakness, but you can see how, it might not be helpful for law enforcement just to put out an alert every time a child is missing, because they may be flooded and overwhelmed with people calling and saying, I saw a 5-year-old boy. That person has no idea what the boy looks like. These Amber Alerts are just words. They don't contain a picture. And so we have to remember that their phone systems could be tied up, and they don't want their phone systems tied up with kind of useless information for purposes of an emergent search. They want it open for real tips. And so that's definitely a weakness of the system, but you can understand why the system is set up the way that it is to try and get at something very specific. A car that's moving quickly, probably across state lines, fleeing law enforcement, and to get as many eyes on it as possible so that they can kind of pinpoint where that car is going to stop the kidnapping.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely an aside, but I think you're 100% right about this. I think this is one of those things where when you initially hear it, it's very easy to be like, well, of course they should. Why? That's ridiculous. They should issue an Amber Alert every time a child goes missing. And I get that. But a couple things. Number one, just alarm fatigue is a thing. And if you literally got an Amber Alert every time a child went missing, unfortunately, you'd probably be getting a lot of them. And as Alice said, no matter how detailed the description of the child, it's going to match a ton of kids. If all you have is 5-year-old boy, brown hair, 3'4" or whatever, 80 pounds, whatever a 5-year-old boy weighs, if that's all you have, you're going to see that everywhere. And so tying it to something very specific, like a vehicle, a license plate, something like that, really helps make it much more effective than it would otherwise be. It lessens the alarm fatigue, and it allows people to actually help, and you don't have just this flood of useless tips. So I get it. I understand why people feel like this is a weakness. I just don't know how to fix it, and I don't know necessarily that the way to fix it is to just issue one every time a child goes missing. I think you probably would see more negative come from that than positive.
I think that's right, Brett. Now let's talk about the school, Skyline. Now the school we've talked about is in Portland, Oregon, but honestly, you'd never know it because it's in the middle of nowhere. It's beautiful. It's surrounded by deep forests, equally deep ravines with mountains visible in the distance. It feels like you are in this outdoor oasis. So when Kyron first disappeared, the police seriously considered that Kyron could have simply walked into the wilderness. Maybe he got distracted. He was searching for tree frogs to go with his project, or he was just a young boy who followed a chipmunk or a stick and kind of got one step too far and all of a sudden lost his way in the woods or the ravine and got turned around and didn't know which way was back to school. And so during the large search that ensued, volunteers were often cutting through foliage with machetes because they were trying to see if he had gotten lost in this dense brush. But that's how dense it was. This is not the city. This is not what you may think of as the Pacific Northwest in the city. This is just deep in kind of the wilderness. And, police were trying to think of where a young boy would try and get some shelter if you were scared and lost. So they searched in barns and crawl spaces, and they brought dogs to try and search out places. But, we've talked about these types of searches before in the Maura Murray case, in the Brandon Lawson case. We've talked about how when there's dense brush, it can be really hard to recover someone. So if you're thinking about kind of what this school is surrounded by, even though there were hundreds of people searching and they searched far and wide with machetes to cut through the brush, if in fact he was lost in the woods, it would have almost been a miracle to stumble across him. But the police were determined, right? They're trying to think of every place he could possibly hide. But that's kind of another sticking point there. If he's hiding, which it's a kind of an instinct to hide when you're lost and scared in the wilderness, is to try and find some shelter. You end up crawling somewhere that maybe others wouldn't think you'd be. It's not an obvious place. But despite all these efforts, despite dogs being brought in to try and find Kyron, there was absolutely no sign of Kyron ever found in these extensive searches. Not a sniff, not a trail gone cold, nothing.
And if you guys follow Missing 411, there are certainly cases where people, children in particular, sort of wander off into the wilderness and then end up in places that it just seems impossible they could be. Very far away, really difficult climbs. I mean, just insane things that really don't make any sense. And there's sort of a lot of theories about that, about how that happens. But just assume for a second it's not supernatural or paranormal or aliens or anything like that. This is something that I think you cannot totally disregard as a possibility. One thing we talked about, the timeline. So Kyron gets there. He assumed Terry's telling the truth. They get there, they set up the project, they're taking pictures, just talking to people. By like 8:30, she's already waving bye to him, and he's sort of going to his classroom. Well, that means there's a good hour or so that he has between that point and when that first class is going to start. And so one thing you could imagine is he does decide to go play in the woods or go look for tree frogs or whatever. He's just wasting some time until class starts. I mean, that was something that we did when I was a kid in elementary school. My elementary school, I mean, everything where I lived was in the middle of nowhere because I just lived in the middle of nowhere. And we would do things waiting on the bus or whatever, or we'd wander off and walk through the fields and everything else, right? So I could imagine something like this happen. One thing I'd be interested to know is if you are from this area or if you went to Skyline, is that something kids do? When there's time, do kids, oftentimes there will be places where kids will go. You know, like they talked about barns, they talked about this tunnel they searched. You could imagine kids going to certain places to spend time, waste time, hang out with their friends where they have to go back to class. And you could think he does something like this. And then, like Alice said, for some reason, he keeps going and he gets turned around and he can't find his way out. And I think that's something you can't discount, even if it may seem like it's unlikely.
Yeah, and with kind of all the trees, all the foliage, and just the environment of the Pacific Northwest, it's probably pretty moist, pretty dense in terms of vegetation. It's not that surprising, to be honest, that dogs wouldn't have hit on a scent, especially if they just weren't in the general area that Kyron walked off in. Now, but this would all kind of presuppose something very important, which is Kyron would have left on his own if he were wandering and then got lost. So would Kyron have left on his own? Now, Kyron's mom would state that Kyron was very afraid of getting lost. This is something like a deep anxiety of his, and he thought about it and talked about it a lot. So the thought that he would simply wander off into the woods just didn't seem likely to her. And Kyron's coat, along with his backpack, were actually still at the school. Now, Kyron was very proud of his tree frog exhibit and was excited to show it off that day to all of his classmates. And it just doesn't make any sense that he would leave that day. I mean, that was an exciting day for him. He'd worked hard on this project. They brought it to school. You know, Terry came and took pictures of him standing proudly in front of it. It wasn't a wander off kind of day, and he wasn't a wander off kind of kid, according to his mom.
And I take his mom at her word here that this is not the kind of thing he would necessarily do. I still don't think that means he didn't do it. I think you talk about age to degree. I think most people would have said, and I'm sure her parents would have said, that she wasn't the kind of very young girl who would leave the house in the middle of the night in a storm. But she did. And so with Kyron, I get it. He doesn't seem like the kind of kid who would do this, but he's not wandering off into the woods in the middle of the night. He might not necessarily consider this area close to his school, which is his safe space, to be that dangerous. And so maybe he would go a little ways into the woods. And then once again, he gets turned around. And by the time that sort of his fear instinct kicks in, it's almost too late. And then, depending on the weather, I forget, it's pretty late in the year when all this happens, but I think it was still pretty cold. The burrowing thing could happen, which is a weird thing that happens when people are in the wilderness and they kind of bury themselves to stay warm or whatever. And once that happens, it becomes really hard to find somebody. So, as we said earlier, you can't completely rule this out when you're thinking about this case, but I gotta say, I don't think, and this, I don't know why I say this, but I just don't think that this is an accident or some sort of misadventure. I don't think Kyron went into the woods. This was a pretty good search. You combine the fact that it's a good search. Good searches miss people all the time, but nevertheless, it's a good search. And what Desiree says about just his general behavior, I think you can probably rule this out, though never completely. And that's the caveat I'm always going to stick with. There's always a chance that that is what happened. And unfortunately, just because of the complete lack of evidence in this case, I don't know that we could ever rule that out. And if it is what happened, we're just going to have to hope that we get lucky one day, because that's the only way that you solve a case like that, is you just get lucky. You know, a hunter or people out on a walk or a dog, something, finds something of his or a body, and then all of a sudden the police have a much clearer idea of what happened. So, one thing that people point to on occasion is Kyron's backpack and jacket. Now, his backpack and his jacket were found in his second grade classroom. Now, does this mean that Kyron made it to class? No, it doesn't. Kyron dropped those items off before he put his project up at the science fair. Now, one thing I think it might suggest is that Kyron didn't leave the school and wander off, because you would think if he was going to go into the forest, if he was going to go outside, it's still pretty early, it's still pretty cold, that he would have gotten his jacket. Now, he's a child, and kids don't always make smart decisions, stuff like that. My daughter, it was 40 degrees yesterday, and she just refused to wear a jacket. So I'm not saying that that's necessarily rock solid, but it is at least a piece of evidence that we can use to try and draw some sort of conclusion about what happened that day.
Guys, we've got a very different kind of sponsor for this episode, The Jordan Harbinger Show, which is a podcast you really should be listening to. And I know that we have been telling you, and I'm sure somebody tells you, that you just have to listen to some podcast, and you nod and say sure, and then you never listen to it. Don't let that happen here. Jordan's show, which Apple named one of its best of 2018, is aimed at making you a better informed, more critical thinker so you can get a sense of how the world actually works and come to your own conclusions about what's happening, even inside your own brain. We think you're going to love his True Crime Starter Pack, where he talks to such interesting people like Billy McFarland, from the Fyre Fest fiasco to federal prison to Freeway Rick Ross, life in the crack lane. Each episode is a conversation with a different fascinating guest, and when I say there's something for everyone, I really mean it.
Guys, we've been telling you for a while about the Jordan Harbinger Show, and if you're not listening, you are missing out. Jordan is always focused on pulling useful, practical insights out of his brilliant guest, and you will love it. If it's not worth checking out, I'm not sure what is. So we really enjoy this show, and we think you will as well. Search for the Jordan Harbinger Show. That's HARB as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies, all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Alice, I probably eat more meat than most people, and let me tell you, it can be expensive to find good stuff. And that's why I love ButcherBox. ButcherBox takes the guesswork out of finding high-quality meat and seafood that you can trust. This is 100% grass-fed beef, free-range organic chicken, pork-raised crate-free, and wild-caught seafood. And even better, it is incredibly convenient with free shipping for the continental U.S. and no surprise fees. And you can enjoy a range of high-quality cuts that are hard to come by at the grocery store at an amazing value. Exclusive member deals save you big on your favorite cuts.
Absolutely, Brett. I have, two growing boys who absolutely love meat. And here's the thing, even at their young age, they have such discerning tastes and they want only the best cuts of meat. Well, ButcherBox does not let down. Having it delivered right to my door, I'm able to have the freshest, best cuts of meat available for my boys. I recently made them ribeye steaks and they were just salivating as I was cooking them. Now they have a 1-week flash sale on the most impressive tomahawk steaks. Your search for amazing deals on a cut above the rest ends with ButcherBox. ButcherBox is offering our listeners tomahawk steaks free in the first box when you join. Sign up today at butcherbox.com/prosecute and get free tomahawk steak in your first box. Offer valid for 1 week only. That's butcherbox.com Faherty.com/prosecute to get this special flash sale offer. Guys, we are so excited about our sponsor today, Faherty, because Faherty is a family brand founded by Alex, his wife Carrie, and his twin brother Mike that channels their love of the beach lifestyle into clothing for life's greatest moments. Faherty's passionate about craftsmanship, comfort, and sustainability, which is so refreshing in this day and age where these big box stores kind of make these clothes that don't last a single season. That's not the case with Faherty because every piece is designed to be a lifetime favorite. And if anything happens along the way, Faherty will replace or fix your clothes for life, no matter what.
Alice, I love the fall. I love the cool weather. I love just hanging out and watching the leaves fall from the trees. And I love doing it in my Legend sweater shirt. And there is something for everybody at Faherty. Clothes that you will love while you enjoy your favorite time of year. And Faherty is giving all Prosecutors listeners an amazing deal. 20% off on your order. Head to fahertybrand.com/TP and use code TP at checkout to get this deal. That's code TP at Faherty, FAHERTY, brand.com/TP for 20% off. fahertybrand.com/TP.
Guys, we are in the midst of the holiday season, which is just so busy for me, for any working parent I know. Well, with HelloFresh, you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. This is exactly what I need for this holiday season to make my life easier. And it's the most festive time of the year, and HelloFresh is here to help make the most of every moment. From holiday hosting to dinners during busy weeknights, you can count on HelloFresh to deliver fresh ingredients and seasonal recipes. And 'tis the season for saving money wherever you can. HelloFresh is cheaper than grocery shopping and 25% less expensive than takeout. So you can use those savings for holiday gifts or just to treat yourself.
Alice, just yesterday, somebody was asking me, do you really love HelloFresh as much as you say you do? And the answer is an unequivocal yes. HelloFresh is quality. Its ingredients travel from the farm to your home in less than 7 days, so you know they're fresh. We just recently made the firecracker meatballs, and they were amazing. And if you're traveling over the holidays, HelloFresh has plans that work with your schedule. Change your preferences, delivery day, and address in just a few clicks. So go to HelloFresh.com/TP18 and use code TP18 for 18 free meals plus free shipping. That's HelloFresh.com/TP18 and use code TP18 for 18 free meals and free shipping. And when you do, you will learn why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit.
I think it points to, it doesn't necessarily rule out the wandering off, but I don't think he necessarily mentally for good.
Right. I think that's right. So, more interesting than the jacket, more interesting than the backpack, going back to Terry. So I think we've taken our little wilderness jaunt on this case about the possibility that he just wandered off. Let's get back to Terry. Now let's talk about that last time that she saw Kyron. So, Terry's story changes about this, which is always a red flag. Initially, she says that, they went downstairs, they went to visit that teacher, then Kyron goes up one set of stairs closer to his classroom, she goes up another set of stairs, which is closer to the gym, and she watches Kyron walk into his classroom, and they wave at each other before he disappears inside. And this is sort of the perfect thing. This is what you would expect the good mother, the good guardian to do. Watch the child until they're safely inside the classroom. Now, this statement, however, would become a red flag because when the police went to the school and went to that stairway, they noticed something important. From the stairway where Terry said that she was standing, you cannot see Kyron's classroom. So it's impossible for her to have been standing at that stairway and seen Kyron walk in to his classroom. So Terry amends her statement to say that she waved at him as he made the turn down the hallway to his classroom, which is a little different. That's different from seeing him walk into his classroom. Now all of a sudden he's walking down the hallway. Of course, this is a change she had to make because it was impossible.
And we see people amend their stories sometimes. Also, although I will say we often have people insist that's what they remember, even if it's not physically possible, and they're confronted with the alternate facts. People who are like sure of what they saw, they're like, no, that is what I saw, and that's not what happens here. And I find that interesting because we do find that when people are very sure that they're right and they're not trying to change their story to fit what the facts are that we present to them, which actually, for me, when I'm interviewing someone, lends credibility to what they're saying, because we are mistaken all the time. That's why we tell you firsthand testimony is not necessarily the most reliable, because people have faulty memories. But this, I think, paired in conjunction with the fact that we know his class didn't start for more than an hour after the time that Terry claims she saw him walk into the classroom, makes it very interesting. Because maybe she didn't see him go into the classroom, because maybe he didn't go in the classroom because class wasn't going to start for more than an hour. So, that's something that definitely creates a red flag for me as well.
And Alice is 100% right. If someone tells you something that's impossible and then they stick by it, they are telling you the truth. They're wrong and they may be useless to you, but they believe that and they're going to stick to it, by goodness. And when somebody starts changing their story, then you get a little... Because usually what you would expect is, say she's telling the truth, like well, that's weird. I could have sworn I saw him walking in the classroom. And just confusion. She would just be confused. Like, what do you mean you can't see it? I know I watched him walk in the classroom. For her to change her story, I think significant, because it's like she's generating something new and different. She's not confused. She's like, oh, no, it wasn't his classroom. It was the hallway. He was walking down his hallway. That makes you think this is somebody who's trying to fit their story into the facts to keep attention off of them. Now, as we said before, people lie for multiple reasons. You can lie because you're guilty, or you can lie because you're innocent, and you're trying to keep people from thinking you're guilty. I am convinced, and I've said this before, that there are more people in prison because they lie to the police because they're innocent, like not guilty people. People who are in prison who shouldn't be in prison. I think one of the reasons some of them are there is because they lie to the police to try and distance themselves from a crime that they didn't commit. The police find out about the lie, and they never believe them again, and they just assume they did it. And maybe that's something that's happening here. Interestingly, though, this is not the last story that Terry tells. In fact, she also says later on that when she left Kyron, he was being shown the other science exhibits by a chaperone, which is completely different from this other story. Now, he's still in the gym, and he's being shown all the other science exhibits. Now, it's true that there were PTA parents, and they had led kids around to see the exhibits, but the group leader would say that Kyron wasn't present when this occurred. The person who was with Kyron's classmates, the person that he would have been with, Kyron wasn't there. So basically, he's like, look, if that's what Terry's saying, that's not true. And so Terry's story changes a little bit again. Her final story is that when she left, it wasn't the chaperone he was talking to. It was a stranger, a strange man that she didn't recognize. And that's who he was talking to when all of this sort of exhibiting was going on. Now, if that were true, you would think that would have been the first thing she would have said. You got a kid who's missing.
Oh my gosh, yeah, she'd be like, wait, I saw a man. He was strange. Go find him.
But that's not what she did. It took her a while to get there. And the most charitable thing you can say is she felt guilty about it. And rather than admit that she should have done something when she saw Kyron talking to some strange man, she lies to protect herself, even though that's going to hurt the search for Kyron. I mean, that's the most charitable thing you can say about this, which is not particularly charitable to her.
Right. The point in all of this, whether she is lying because she's innocent or lying because she's guilty, is that these inconsistencies aren't merely lapses of memory. They seem to indicate a desire to fit the facts as law enforcement's uncovering them. And that's always going to cause suspicion, because she is the last person that we know to have seen him definitively. Like, there might be a student who claims that they saw Kyron, but we have a picture that she took that day wearing the clothes that he wore that day. And so really, she is the last best witness we have of him. And what she has to say is really important to law enforcement. And the fact that it keeps changing is really damaging to law enforcement's ability to find him.
And that's 100% right. The last person to see someone before they're murdered or they go missing is the most important witness. And you really need a good statement from them that gives you something to build off of. And instead, you have 4 different versions from her of what exactly happened. And what are the police supposed to do with that other than assume you're lying to them and that maybe you had something to do with it? Which, if you didn't, is now the worst case scenario because their focus is going to be on you and not finding Kyron or finding the person who had something to do with him going missing. So this is confounding in a lot of ways, annoying in others, and suspicious, definitely.
Yeah. Now let's talk more about Terry and her choice of vehicle, because typically Terry drives a cherry red Mustang with a license plate RDSQRL. So pretty distinctive car. But she didn't take that vehicle that day. Instead, she took the truck, a white Ford F-250 extended cab 4-door, a big car. It's been reported that either they needed the space to load up the science fair project or Terry thought she'd be taking it home that day. But both are false because remember what we talked about in the timeline. The project had been delivered to the school by Terry the day before, so there was no need to drive a bigger car that day for purposes of bringing the tree frog project. And the project was supposed to stay at the school for the next week because remember, there wasn't another whole week of school left. And so she did not expect to bring it home that day. And in fact, you remember, Terry sent an email that afternoon to Kyron's teacher asking her when she could pick up the project. So the intention never was, at least when she went to go get a car that morning, to pick up the project the same day. She didn't know when she was going to pick up the project. Now, when asked about this, why she drove the car that she chose to drive that day, Terry said she'd parked the truck in the school parking lot that morning and walked Kyron inside. But this would be questioned later. Because when Terry went to Fred Meyer's, remember, to try and find that Motrin for her daughter, video showed her parking far away from the store, despite the fact that there were parking spots closer in. And typically when you have a small child that you have to hold or walk with to go to the store, I know I'm always trying to find the closest spot possible. And generally, I think that is typical behavior. People are trying to circle the lots to find closer parking spots. Now, when she was asked why she did this, why she parked so far away at Fred Meyer's, she told police that Kane liked to park far away from the entrance to keep anyone from damaging the truck. And since she was driving his truck, she did the same to protect the truck. Now, the problem is, and that, by the way, I've heard of people doing that. You know, I think it's a reasonable thing that some people do to protect their cars. Except Kane expressed puzzlement at this assertion. When police asked him about it, he said, I don't typically do that. That's not something I do. So it's strange for Terry to say she did that because Kane typically had that practice of parking far away.
Yeah, okay. So what do we have here? I mean, we have some things that are kind of inexplicable. She's not driving the car she normally drives. She's driving the truck instead. The reasons that are proffered for why she's driving it are false. That's not why she was driving it. She never really gives a good reason why she's driving it. You know, she claims that she walked Kyron in. She parked in the parking lot. We're going to talk about that later. There are people who say it didn't happen. And then you have this whole parking far away thing, which she says she's doing for a reason that Kane says is not right. There are just so many things she says that don't line up with reality. And the more things she says that don't line up with reality, the more you wonder, why is she telling us these things that aren't true? You can only push the she's lying to protect herself, to make herself look innocent so far. And, you know, you might think if you got to do something with a body, it's better to have a truck than a Mustang. And you might think if you have a body in the back of the truck and you're trying to create an alibi, you park a long way away because you don't want anybody looking in the truck. So if you park far away, nobody's going to park next to you because nobody else wants to walk that far. And so you can do this and avoid anybody seeing you. She has a reason, but it's a reason that doesn't hold up. And I just got to tell you, when you have a child, a young child who's sick, doesn't feel well, is probably pitching a fit. The last thing you want to do is walk them further. You want to make this as easy as possible. And yet she doesn't do that. I mean, frankly, even if I was worried about the truck, this might be a circumstance in which I would be like, you know what? Forget the truck. We're going to park closer.
Yeah.
But she doesn't do that.
Literally, I went to like a pharmacy, like a corner pharmacy to pick up some stomach medicine for my kid who was not feeling well. And he was like whining so much. I never used the drive-through pharmacy, and I did it there because I was like, I don't want to unbuckle him. And, he's already crying, and then pull him out of the car and then have to struggle putting him back in the car seat. I mean, I wanted to avoid that situation so much. I actually even just drove through the pharmacy as opposed to park, even though there was parking, very close to the door. And again, we're saying lots of inconsistencies and people can forget things, especially under stress, but there's also something that we just can't overlook that is worth questioning when we have so little information, and that's Terry's behavior the day Kyron went missing. Now, remember, Desiree, Kyron's mother, has always been suspicious of Terry, and in part because of her behavior the day Kyron went missing. And of course, we told you earlier about the history of how Kyron came to live with Terry. So we recognize we may have to take everything Desiree says with a grain of salt because essentially Terry kept Kyron from her. It was many years before, but I don't think that's something you necessarily get over right away. But up until now, they've at least had an amicable co-parenting strategy. They were all in each other's lives, and they were all in Kyron's life. And never before has Desiree had any indication of lying about Terry's behavior. So while you take it with a grain of salt, also recognize that this is not like a pattern of behavior that Desiree would make up things about Terry out of anger, or spite or anything like that. Now, first, she seemed surprised when Desiree said she was going to make the 4-hour drive to come look for Kyron. Remember, we already talked about that. She kind of was like, why would you drive so far? And she repeatedly mentioned the fact that Kyron didn't have his jacket, as if implying that he must have just wandered off on his own. By the way, both of those things, I mean, I think if you're a parent listening, you'd be like, well, it doesn't matter how far away I am. If my child's missing, I'm going to be there. I'm going to come right back to look for him. And the fact that she is the guardian mother, really, of Kyron, and she thought it was strange for Desiree to make the 4-hour drive is something that made at least Desiree think, why would you even think that? Of course I'd be there. And the whole jacket comment, we've heard people say this as people wander off or whatnot. It's not the comment about his jacket being left behind that I find strange. It's more the next conclusion she reaches, which is that, oh, well, he just wandered off, as opposed to being taken or something like that. That actually makes me more worried because I would think if he's not in the school, he's somewhere in the elements and he doesn't have his jacket is what my mother mind goes straight to, which is even more worried that he doesn't have his jacket. Like, at least if he has his jacket, he has some protection against the elements, but that's not where Terry's mind went. Now, at the same time, she immediately cast suspicion on a janitor she said was strange, but that janitor was quickly cleared. And we've talked about this in the Hinter-Kaifek case. We have seen this often where someone who ends up being the perpetrator will try to point fingers at other people for obvious reasons, to distract the police or lead them down rabbit trails. And it is interesting that she immediately points to someone who actually it didn't take very long to clear this man.
Yeah, it's interesting because on the one hand, she's like, oh, he probably just wandered off. On the other hand, she's like, or maybe that guy did it. And it kind of goes back to her whole thing at the school where it's like, oh, I watched him walk to his class. Oh, actually, no, he was talking to a weird stranger. That's
which one is it?
Raise some red flags. Yeah, which one is it?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's like, okay, fine. If your impression is it's not a big deal, you shouldn't drive 4 hours to come find him or look for him, and he doesn't have a jacket, no big deal. And then also, this really strange man had something to do with it. You're like, well, that would indicate some terrible thing has happened, and that you wouldn't. Seems like those different reactions aren't consistent with each other. Now, when Desiree arrived, she was unusually and overtly happy to see Desiree. It was as if she was there for some joyous occasion, like a celebration, and not to find her missing son, which she just found strange. That's not usually how Terry greets Desiree. And Desiree also mentioned that if Terry were concerned, she just didn't show it, When the family was told to turn over their cell phones, everyone complied without question. They immediately were like, yes, whatever you need from us to help find Kyron, absolutely. Except for Terry, who did not like this idea and did not want to hand over her cell phone.
And this is something that's going to continue, that everyone in the family is basically doing whatever the police ask, except for Terry. And let's talk about the lie detector test. It's a pretty common thing when the kid goes missing. One of the things you want to do is eliminate the parents as quickly as possible. As we've said, and as everyone knows, if a child dies, the first suspects are going to be the parents, and more times than not, the parents are the ones who are going to be responsible. So the police wanted to give everybody lie detector tests, and everyone in the family took a lie detector test, and everyone in the family passed their lie detector test, except for Terry. Now, Terry would later say that she couldn't hear the questions well, and she thought that that contributed to the result. If only she could have heard the questions, her results would have come back a little bit better. And Terry told her family that during the post-polygraph interview, police said they'd found Kyron's DNA in the back of the truck. Now, it's unclear if this is true or if the police were trying to spook Terry. And when they say back of the truck, I assume they mean the bed of the truck, because it wouldn't be that unusual for his DNA to be inside the truck. Probably wouldn't even be that unusual for it to be in the bed of the truck, but maybe a little bit more significant. And we've talked about lie detectors before. Believe them, don't believe them, useless, not useless. But it is just an interesting fact that happened in this case, that this was sort of, she didn't want to take it. It took a while to get her to take it. When she took it, she failed it. I think she took another one and failed it too, or was inconclusive.
I'll say this. We've talked about lie detector tests and how a lot of times they're unreliable. They're not admissible in court. But with all of that said, we still work with a lot of law enforcement who want to use it, not because they think it'll be admissible in court or that they'll be able to tell if someone's lying. Rather, they use it as an interview or interrogation tool to see how the person reacts, to put them in a stressful situation, to see if it in fact triggers the person to kind of give up something. So it's not even, it's the fact that they're taking the test rather than the test itself is often what law enforcement are even using as a tactic.
And that's so true. It's so valuable to be able to tell somebody you failed your lie detector test, because a lot of times they'll just admit it at that point. They'll just come clean and they'll say exactly what happened. So that is a really big reason they use it. They also, it sort of confirms what they already think sometimes. So they probably figured, I mean, Desiree, for instance, there's no way Desiree could have been involved in this. She was 4 hours away. She still took the lie detector. She passed it. And at that point, she's ironclad cleared. There's no police officer who's ever going to think she had anything to do with it because of those two facts combined. Terry, people were probably already suspicious of her. And so once she failed the lie detector, then they were really suspicious of her and began to wonder if she was involved. And so they start to tell her these things to try and pressure her. You failed. Oh, and by the way, we found DNA. Had they found DNA? I don't know. Honestly, probably not. If I had to guess, I would say that was probably a bluff. Or, sure, they found DNA. It's his father's truck. Would be kind of surprising if his DNA weren't around there. But they were trying to put some pressure on her to see if she would crack. Obviously, she did not. The last thing we're going to talk about today is, it's sort of unfair to leave you with this, because this is one of the most significant things that happened in this entire case. And it goes back to that whole, where did Terry park that day question. So as the investigation continued, the local sheriff would tell Desiree something that has honestly confused this case ever since. He told her that a student and an adult, so two witnesses, had reported seeing Kyron leaving the south entrance of the school with Terry. And the truck, according to these witnesses, was parked at this entrance, not the school parking lot, as Terry had said. Now, why is this significant? You remember, the FBI, they talked to everybody at that school, talked to all the parents, talked to all the kids. These people apparently said this. South entrance is farther away from the gym and all that other stuff where they should have been. It's a part of the school where on that day, with all the focus being on the gym, there wouldn't have been that many people. So the fact that anybody saw this was interesting. So what you can imagine happening if this is true, they leave the gym where they've left the school project, walk down the hallway all the way to this south entrance, go out the south entrance and get into the truck, which has been parked at this south entrance, not in the parking lot. that's a bad fact for Terry, because it means not only did she not see Kyron enter his classroom or turn down the hall or talking to a chaperone or talking to a stranger, she left with him. And that's something that's really hard to explain. Now, here's the problem with this. The sheriff's office would later backtrack on this comment. They didn't say it wasn't true. They just basically said they couldn't confirm that information and they stopped talking about it. And it's unclear if this was somebody misspoke, they said something that wasn't true, or they said something they weren't really supposed to say. As we've said 1,000 times, the police keep back a lot of information for a lot of different reasons. This is a pretty significant piece of information if it's true. So maybe it's something the police wanted to keep back. So we can't say for certain that these witnesses exist. We can't say exactly what they said. All we can tell you is what's been reported by Desiree. Obviously, if this statement is accurate, it casts a huge cloud of suspicion over Terry.
That is an unfair note to end on. But, it's really funny. I thought we were going to be able to finish today, but there's so much to talk about still. And I'm glad we're not rushing it, because we'll be able to give it due kind of consideration as we move through this.
And I'm really excited about the next episode, because what we're going to do in the next episode is talk about what I think is the most interesting thing about this case. And that's Terry's path and the way she went and where she drove and when she went there, and the distances between these places and the times and how it fits with everything else she was doing. And I think when we walk through this with you, we've already told you in the timeline about her kind of driving all over the place. We talked about how she drove around for so long with her child in the back of the car, and you probably thought that was weird. When we walk through for you everywhere she went, when she went there, the distances and everything else she was doing, your mind is going to be blown. You're going to be like, this is so strange. We're going to do that in the next episode. We're going to walk through it with you, take you along her path that day. And honestly, what she did that day is the most suspicious thing about her activities. And I think you're really going to be interested to see that. So I hope that you'll stick with us for the third episode. I kind of thought we'd do this in 2 episodes too, but Alice and I, we just can't. We can't help ourselves.
We
can't stop talking, which is a good thing we have a podcast.
I'm gonna have to remember this throughout Alaska.
I know. Hold on to this, Alice. Hold on to this. So I do think we'll finish next time. I think. Pretty sure.
We'll see. No promises. We're really bad at these types of promises.
Never any promises, because we're really going to dig into all this driving she did. So we'll see what happens. Well, I hope you guys are enjoying this. Shoot us an email if you have any thoughts, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Hello, if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to put a lot of different maps up next time. So if you're watching on YouTube, you're going to have some visual assistance in our discussion as well. And hello to all of you on Patreon who are listening early and ad-free. We love you guys. Thanks for telling your friends. Thanks for leaving those 5-star reviews. You're the best. And by the time you hear this, we're going to be heading towards Christmas. Hope everybody's ready for Christmas. Hope you had a joyous Thanksgiving. And, Christmas is one of my favorite holidays. I'm like, we're not even to Thanksgiving yet when we're recording this. I have already watched a ton of Hallmark Christmas movies.
Me
and we'll
too.
continue to do so.
Oh, I watched.
Oh, they're so great.
I watched one of my favorites. It's good when it's not my favorite, but when you watch another one, when you watch one more than once, that says something about that Christmas movie. So I've watched it in years past, but I watched The Night Before Christmas, KNIGHT. Fantastic. What a great one. I recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, snowmans. I love snowmans so much.
Snowmans
if you can
is so
find
good.
it, it's hard to find. But if you can find it, you got to watch it. It's great. It's so realistic. It's the most realistic one. If, falling in love with a snowman is realistic, but well, we've kept you guys long enough. We'll obviously be back next week with more stuff, but until then, Alice, have a great trip to Alaska. I hope you enjoy yourself.
I'm going to miss you, but I will bring you back something. I don't know what from Alaska. We'll see.
Well, that's awesome. I can't wait. I can't wait till you do that. And once you return, we'll be back recording more episodes. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Is that in the Palouse? Is that in the Palouse?
Huh?
The Palouse.
The Palouse? Wait, what?
The Palouse. It's like a, I don't know what it is, but it's like a region of the country.
Oh, okay.
The Palouse.
The Palouse.
Like Washington State is in the Palouse.
I didn't know what that was.
The Palouse is a distinct geographic region of the northwestern United States, encompassing parts of north central Idaho, southeastern Washington, and by some definitions, parts of northeast Oregon. There you go.
Huh.
The Palouse.
The Palouse.
Anyways.
I'm ready anytime.
Yep. The Palouse is home to 2 land-grant universities, Idaho in Moscow and Washington State University in Pullman. They're only 8 miles apart. Wow. I didn't know that.
Sweet.
Just learned a lot.
There you go.
All month long on Pluto TV, stream the biggest Tyler Perry movies free. Watch your favorites like Medea's Witness Protection and Medea's Big Happy Family. Join Tyler Perry as he goes on a couples retreat with Sharon Leal in Why Did I Get Married? Or Idris Elba and Gabrielle Union in the Tyler Perry directed film Daddy's Little Girls. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies and TV shows available on live and on demand. Download the free Pluto TV